Okay, this is an update to my work in progress attachment guide, gun build guide. Since I last talked about this, I've level 50 two more guns. The M4 here, and the Tavor. And level 15 the Tavor is what prompted me to make another one of these, because I feel the experience of almost going with a different kind of gun build better explains why I eventually went back to using the kind of gun build I was using in the last video. The Tavor, as you know if you've used it, has pretty nasty recoil. And I was getting kind of sick of putting in the effort of constantly having to wrangle it. So I thought, well, what if I gave up on my previously stated principle that since recoil is something that you can mitigate with input, you should focus your attachments on improving stats of your gun that are baked in, that the player's input cannot improve, because that would allow you to get the best of both worlds if you're good at recoil control yourself, and then improve the gun in stats that are not recoil, that you can't improve with your own input. You get a better, more effective gun overall. But the recoil was a bit irritating, so I decided to try what I'll call a noob build, a recoil reduction build. So I used an unmagnified optic, because that'll minimize the visual recoil. Obviously, we still want to use a suppressor. So we use the lighten suppressor. That reduces recoil buildup. We use the Tavor's special light barrel, which increases its bullet velocity, just like the extended barrel, but also decreases its ADS time. And then we have 30 points left, so we use it on a 30-point grip. So the canted stubby here, for as much recoil reduction as we can get. And the result is that it makes the gun a lot more usable in automatic fire at range while aiming down sights. Now obviously these are static targets, so it's not necessarily indicative of how effective it is against moving players, especially ones that aren't exposing their whole bodies standing upright like this. But as you can see, you can mag dump people with this thing now at 30 meters. 40 meters, not really, right? But 30 meters, absolutely, right? You can just hose them down. Way easier to keep your sight on target with this kind of build. And so I started thinking, I wonder what it would be like if I use this kind of build on other guns, like, say, the M4. Obviously, the M4 doesn't have that special short barrel, so we just use the extended barrel for better performance against moving targets. That gives us an extra 5 points, so we can get the 35-point vertical grip for even more recoil reduction. And as you can see, it just turns into a laser beam. It turns into a hose. You can just point it at a target and hold the fire button down until it dies. Right? Very simple. Very easy to use. This is why I call this the noob build. I think it's a noob trap, because it makes the guns very easy to use. It's very easy to just point at a target and hose it down. It's very easy. I won't deny that it's easy. And on lazy days, there's a reason that I have all these guns set up with, the base factory version has this noob setup, and the level 50 mastery version has my build on it. Because sometimes if I'm just feeling lazy, I have been known to sometimes whip this out. But I am not going to argue that overall this is more effective. As I said before, and I will reiterate, it is more optimal if your gun complements your skill and your input. Since recoil can be mitigated with human input, it is better, it is more optimal that you handle the recoil and the gun handles all the other stats that it can have, or I should say the attachments handle all the other stats the gun has, because they cannot be improved with your input. Only the recoil can be improved with your input. So it is more optimal to use attachments to buff those other baked-in stats that you can't do anything about, so that, assuming you are sufficiently skilled at managing your gun's recoil, it is thus even more effective than had you used those points to mitigate the recoil for you. Because then it would be lacking in those other baked-in stats that you can't do anything about. And as you can kind of see from how wide my crosshair is, obviously we're not using any hipfire attachments on this build, so our hipfire is kind of bad. Not that atrocious on the M4 because it has a very high base hipfire. It has a base 46 hipfire. Of course, we're using a suppressor, so it takes it down to 40. You know, if we look at something like the G36, you know, it goes all the way down to 34, which is just absolutely just abysmal. Anybody with a hipfire build is definitely going to beat you in hipfire. So your only option here, if you want to compete at close range with a build like this, is you're going to have to use a unmagnified optic, which you were already using anyway because, you know, this is the new build. It's all about minimizing recoil as much as possible, and using a unmagnified optic assists with that. This at least means that, you know, aim-wise, input-wise, an unmagnified optic in ADS is identical to your hipfire, but it slows you down. You're slower than if you're hipfiring, and it takes time to ADS. Whereas hipfire, as soon as you point it at the target, you can just start firing. So you're still at a distinct disadvantage at close range with a build like this. It's usable, but a lot of people are going to get the drop on you. They're going to have the advantage. You're going to have to be real careful about what situations you get yourself into in CQB. And I don't like doing that because I like to be able to just, you know, go capture whatever objective I need to capture and go on the map where I need to go and not really worry about whether my gun is going to be usable in that part of the map, in the situations I find myself in, depending on where I need to go. Like, obviously, if you're, you know, using a sniper rifle, you have to stay at range because it's, you know, just going to get you killed up close. But with automatic weapons like this, like, really, you want to be able to use them wherever you need to go, right? Versatility is very useful in terms of actually, like, being effective in winning the match. And it's not just close range. At farther ranges, if you're using this unmagnified optic to at least have some kind of chance at close range, it can get difficult to see targets at long range. Especially when they're not, you know, standing upright and standing still like the targets on this firing range. Right? If someone's just poking their head over a windowsill or the corner of a windowsill in a dark building, it can be quite hard to see them there. So sure, you can mag dump people at mid-range with a build like this, but whether you can actually see your target at that range, let alone track them, is a different story. Now you can of course mitigate that by using a higher powered optic, and of course with all this recoil reduction, it's going to help you keep the weapon controllable even with a higher powered optic. But if you use a higher powered optic, you are even more fucked at close range. And the distance at which you are fucked in close range is extended. So if you go this route, you are absolutely chained to mid-range fighting, because at close range, it is so awkward to try and track targets with so much of your peripheral view missing because of the zoom. So this isn't optimal, in my opinion. It's easy to use, but it's not the best. The best is still the build I was working on last time. A hip-fire build. CQB suppressor. Short barrel. 20-point laser. And a thermal sight. That high hip fire means that you can, even if your gun isn't necessarily the greatest in terms of time to kill for close quarters, it means that you can at least hit your targets, which at least gives you a good chance, especially if you get the first shot off, right? This can make even guns that are objectively longer range guns, like the G3 here, absolutely usable at close range. But it's the thermal sight that brings this all together that makes it effective at longer ranges. Because, of course, we're not using any recoil mitigation attachments. But we are mitigating it in other ways. I'm at max FOV. That reduces it. The thermal sight is only a 1.5 times, which doesn't increase it that much compared to higher powered optics. And furthermore, even though it is only a 1.5 times, so distant targets can still appear quite small, and thus hard to see, this is a thermal optic. Those little bits of people that are poking out will glow bright white, which means you can put your little fine red crosshair over that little bit of white that is poking out of wherever they are hiding and hit them. So it solves the visibility problem that low magnification sights have, which then allows you to use a lower magnification sight, which will reduce the visual recoil and thus make it easier to manage that recoil. That makes this build, a hip-fire build with a thermal sight, effective at both point-blank and mid-range, and depending on the gun, maybe even long-range. Although you'll probably still lose to DMRs and snipers at long range. But you can at least pick at them, you can annoy them. And that versatility in engagement ranges means you don't have to segregate yourself to particular parts of the map. You're not just totally fucked if someone shows up at close or long range. You have the ability to put bullets on target, regardless of the range. Which means you can go where you want on the map, which means you can be a more effective player and have more effect on winning the match. That is why this, in my opinion, is the best way to build your gun. But it does require a bit more effort than the noob build, because the noob build doesn't require you to have recoil control skills unless you're using the Tavor. The Tavor's recoil is so bad that even with this kind of build, it still kicks like a mule. But it's still way more controllable. However, if you can learn recoil control, oh god, the Tavor with hip fire, god. The Tavor, if you don't know, has the second highest time to kill of any automatic weapon in the game within 10 meters, and the fastest time to kill of any automatic weapon in the game between 10 and 20 meters. And then it's tied with like the M7 out to 75 meters from there, because it's 720 RPM, 25 damage. So it has like the best damage model in the entire game. And if you can just wrangle the recoil, you will absolutely obliterate people with this gun. Right? Now, since we're not using any recoil mitigation attachments, we can't, you know, mag dump people necessarily at longer ranges, but 30 meters and out, you know what you can do? You can just switch it to semi-auto. Going to semi-auto automatically reduces your per-shot recoil, which means you can basically use it as a quasi-DMR. And with that thermal sight making everybody glow, picking at those targets is going to be pretty easy. So even on the Tavor, I still recommend this build. Because, of course, at close range, with this kind of hip fire, oh, you're going to melt people. It is so good. Before I go, one note about the thermal sight, because it does have a couple downsides that I didn't mention last time. It's not like a pure straight upgrade. I still think it's worth it. But it does have two things you need to be aware of. One, it's not consistent. I don't know that the game's programming is consistent. Like, you can see through this glass, but, like, if you go to Manhattan Bridge, a lot of the glass there in those buildings, you can't see through. It just appears as solid black. You'll need to shoot the glass out in order to be able to see out of it, which can be irritating, although that's really only a problem at the beginning of a match, right? By even midway through the match, like, basically all the glass in the map is going to be destroyed. But more importantly, sure, the thermal sight doesn't get blinded by flashlights. It just totally eliminates it. So anybody who tries to blind with a flashlight, they can get fucked because it's not going to work. But it also can't see scope glint. So if you're using a thermal sight, you need to be careful about engaging targets that are at range. Maybe, if they're not already shooting at you, maybe de-scope for a quick bit and just check if there's a scope glint over there, because you don't want to go picking fights with a sniper that you're almost certainly not going to win. So just keep that in mind. Yeah, so that's why this is my go-to build. But you can see why I was tempted by the noob build, because it is just so much more low effort. It is. I won't deny it. And if you're lazier than me, and I'm already lazy enough that sometimes I will whip this build out when I just don't feel like trying. It's not often, but it does happen, especially with the Tavor. But as far as the future goes, after I get my M40 with 1,000 kills, it's at level 50, but it's not at 1,000 kills yet. Once I get it to 1,000 kills, I'm going to start working on the Grot. I doubt I'll have much to say there, because it's basically just the M4, but worse, because it's got a lower rate of fire, but the same damage model. But I will also start working on the machine guns. I'm going to start with the M250. So once I've got all the attachments on that, I might have some recommendations there. And maybe at some point I will eventually grind out to level 40 on the SVCH here, which will allow me to definitively talk about this gun, because I still don't have the rangefinder. and I still don't have the 6x thermal sight. Prediction? I predict that once I have both of those attachments, I am going to proclaim this to be the best sniper rifle in the game. But we will get there when we get there. Until then, I hope this was useful. Until next time.